The ice water dripped from my chin onto the paper napkin in my lap. My son stood over me, disgusted that I had asked for $50 for medicine. He thought this public humiliation would silence me, but as the cold liquid soaked my blouse, I did not feel shame. I felt clarity. Tomorrow, his safe would be empty, his accounts drained, and I would be on a one-way flight out of America. My name is Marion Elwood, for 35 years. I was the woman behind the desk at Brightline Community Health who remembered everyone's birthdays and made sure the insurance forms were filed in triplicate. I am 58 years old, a widow, and I have spent my entire life making myself smaller so that others could have more room. Tonight, however, sitting in a plastic booth at a chain restaurant on the edge of Phoenix, Arizona, I realized that no matter how small I made myself, it would never be enough for the man sitting across from me. It was supposed to be a celebration. My son, Jacob, had agreed to meet me for dinner for my birthday. Jacob is 33 now, a senior financial analyst at Veritas Ledger, a man who wears suits that cost more than my monthly rent and speaks in a language of dividends and equity that he thinks I do not understand. The restaurant buzzed with the Friday night energy of families and tired workers seeking comfort in fried food. I had ordered the cheapest soup on the menu, mindful of the budget I kept in a small spiral notebook at home. Jacob had ordered a ribeye steak and a craft cocktail with a price tag of $18. I waited until he had finished half his drink before I gathered the courage to speak. I had rehearsed this moment for 3 days. Jacob. I started, keeping my voice low so the people in the next booth would not hear. I hate to bring this up on a night like this, but the landlord raised the rent at the complex again. It went up by $100 starting next month. And with my blood pressure medication copay doubling, I was wondering if maybe you could transfer just a little bit more to help cover the difference. I did not tell him that I had stopped buying meat at the grocery store. I did not tell him that I turned off the air conditioning during the day, sitting in the stifling Arizona heat to save $15 on the electric bill. Jacob stopped chewing. He swallowed slowly, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and looked at me with a mixture of boredom and irritation. "Are you serious right now?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mum? Come on. I just closed on the house in Scottsdale. Do you have any idea what interest rates are right now? My mortgage is $3,000 a month. I have credit card bills. I have car payments. I know. Honey, I know," I said, my hands trembling slightly under the table. "I only need maybe $200, just until I can pick up some extra shifts. I wouldn't ask if I didn't have to. It is always something," he snapped, his voice rising. People at the nearby tables began to turn their heads. "I am not an ATM. Mom, you are 58 years old. You need to learn to manage your own life. Stop leeching off me. It is pathetic." The word hit me harder than a slap. Leeching. I had worked night shifts cleaning offices to pay for his private college tuition. I had eaten instant noodles for 4 years so he could have a laptop and a spring break trip. "I am not trying to be a burden," I whispered, looking down at my soup. He did not let me finish. With a sudden, violent motion, Jacob grabbed his water glass. It was full to the brim with ice and water. He stood up and threw the entire contents directly into my face. The shock was absolute. The cold liquid hit my eyes, blinding me for a second, before running down my nose and soaking into the collar of my favorite beige blouse. An ice cube slid down my cheek and landed with a wet thud on the table. The restaurant went silent. The clatter of silverware stopped. I could feel the water dripping from my eyelashes, blurring my vision. I froze, unable to wipe it away, unable to breathe. I saw the waitress 3 tables away cover her mouth with her hand. I saw a man in a baseball cap glare at Jacob, but Jacob did not care. He threw the receipt down onto the wet table, right into a puddle of spilled water. I am done. Mom, he hissed, looming over me. Con, consider this my last contribution. I have done way too much for you already. Grow up. He turned and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I sat there, the water seeping through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life, a scene so cruel it could not possibly be real. But the cold was real. The stares of the strangers were real. I reached out with a shaking hand to pick up the soggy receipt he had left behind. My eyes focused on the bottom line. The bill had been paid. But as I looked at the payment method, my heart stopped beating for a second. It showed a Visa ending in 4029. It was not his card. It was mine. It was the emergency credit card I had added him to 5 years ago, strictly for emergencies. He had just bought an $18 cocktail and a $40 steak, and then humiliated me in public, all while paying for it with my own money. He had treated me to dinner on my own debt. I sat very still. The waitress approached me cautiously with a towel, her eyes full of pity. Ma'am, are you okay? I took the towel. I wiped the water from my face. As the cold liquid dripped onto the floor, something inside me shifted. The shame that had threatened to swallow me moments ago evaporated. In its place, a heat began to rise. It was a clean, sharp heat. I am fine, I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in years. Jacob thought I was weak. He thought I was just a mother who would dry off, go home, and apologize for asking for too much. He was wrong. The Marian Elwood who sat down at this table was gone. The woman who stood up was someone entirely different. I squeezed the wet receipt in my fist. He had thrown water on me, but he had no idea he had just started a fire. The drive back to my apartment was silent. The air conditioning in my 10-year-old sedan rattled, blowing lukewarm air against my damp clothes. But the chill I felt came from somewhere much deeper than the wet fabric clinging to my skin. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was traveling backward, rewinding through 4 decades of memories that I had always painted with the soft light of maternal love. Now, in the harsh glare of the streetlights, those memories looked different. They looked like evidence. I thought about the years I worked 2 jobs to keep Jacob in that private university 3 states away. By day, I filed claims at Brightline Community Health, smiling at patients while my feet throbbed in cheap shoes. By night, I put on a different uniform to clean office buildings downtown. I remembered the smell of industrial ammonia and the sound of my vacuum cleaner echoing in empty hallways. I ate instant noodles for dinner 5 nights a week so I could send him checks for things he claimed were essential. Mum, everyone else is going on the ski trip. He had told me over the phone during his sophomore year, his voice thick with manipulation. If I don't go, I will be the only one left in the dorms. It is depressing. So I cancelled my dental checkup. I lived with a toothache for 6 months so my son could ski in Vermont. I convinced myself that his happiness was the only return on investment I needed. Then there was the money after Frank died. My husband was a good man, but he left us too soon, crushed in a workplace accident that resulted in a workers' compensation settlement. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to keep me safe in my old age. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing black from the funeral, when Jacob placed a hand on my shoulder. "You shouldn't keep this in a regular checking account." "Mom," he had said, his voice so steady, so reassuring. "Let me set up an investment portfolio. We will call it the Elwood Family Support Fund. I will handle the paperwork. You are too emotional to deal with the fine print right now." I trusted him. I signed where he pointed. I signed the papers for the joint credit card a year later because he said it was convenient for buying my groceries if I got sick. "Just sign here," he had urged, tapping the paper with his pen. "And here? It is just standard banking stuff." "Mum, do you really want to read 50 pages of legal jargon? Trust me. I never read them. I never asked why the monthly statements stopped coming to my mailbox and went digital instead. When the debt collectors started calling about late fees 2 years ago, Jacob dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "It is just a system error. Mom," he had said, looking at his phone instead of me. "The bank merged with another system. Ignore them. I will fix it." I ignored them. I ignored the charge for $3,000 at a Las Vegas hotel that I saw on a statement I accidentally opened. When I asked him, he exploded. That was for a client meeting, he had shouted, making me flinch. "God, do you have to question everything? You have no idea how high-level business works. You are embarrassing me." I had apologized. I had actually apologized to him for asking why my money was spent in a casino. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex and killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I realized now that I was the one who had trained him. I had taught my son that I was a renewable resource, something to be used up and discarded. I had taught him that his desires were emergencies and my needs were optional. I walked up the stairs to my second-floor unit. Inside, the air was stale. I went straight to the bathroom and peeled off the sticky, wet blouse. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was matted with drying sugar water from the glass he threw. My eyes were rimmed with red, surrounded by a web of wrinkles that deepened with every year I spent worrying about his future. I looked at that woman in the mirror and asked her a question I had been too terrified to ask for a decade. "If I died tonight," I whispered to the reflection, would he actually cry? Or would he just be annoyed that he had to file the death certificate to get the rest of the money? The answer stared back at me, cold and absolute. He would check the balance before he checked my pulse. I turned away from the mirror. I did not shower. Instead, I walked into my bedroom and knelt beside the bed. I reached underneath and pulled out a dusty plastic bin. It was heavy. Inside were the physical copies of documents I had managed to save before everything went digital, along with old letters and the few bank statements I had hidden away. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper drifted up. Here were the insurance policies. Here was the deed to the house I sold to pay off his first business debt. Here were the initial papers for the Elwood Family Support Fund. I had kept them because I thought they were sentimental keepsakes of how we built a life together. I ran my thumb over a signature on a loan document. "You thought I was stupid?" "Jacob," I said into the empty room. "You thought I was just a nice old lady who would die quietly. These were not keepsakes anymore. They were ammunition. And tomorrow morning, I was going to load the gun." I walked into the lobby of Frontier Mutual at 9 o'clock in the morning. clutching my plastic bin of documents against my chest like a shield. The air conditioning was freezing, a sharp contrast to the Arizona heat rising outside. But I did not shiver. I felt a strange, vibrating numbness in my fingertips. I was not here to make a deposit. I was here to confirm a crime. I sat down across from a young personal banker named David. He looked barely older than Jacob, with the same eager, polite smile that vanished the moment he pulled up my profile on his screen. "Mrs. Elwood," David said, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. He frowned, tapped a few more keys, and then turned the monitor slightly away from me. "I see your accounts here. But there is a flag on the system regarding access." "What kind of flag?" I asked. My voice sounded thin in the quiet office. "I am the account holder. David. My name is on the checks." "Yes, ma'am. But, well, it appears there is a durable power of attorney on file," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "Granted to a Jacob Elwood 5 years ago. It gives him full administrative access to manage the assets. Most of the recent activity was authorized through his login credentials." I remembered the stack of papers Jacob had brought over one Sunday afternoon, telling me it was just in case I ended up in the hospital and needed bills paid. I had signed them while baking him cookies. "I want to know the balance of the Elwood Family Support Savings Account," I said, gripping the edge of the desk. "The one with the settlement money." David hesitated. He clicked the mouse, and I saw him swallow hard. "Mrs. Elwood, the current balance in that savings account is $42.16. The room seemed to tilt sideways. There should have been nearly $40,000 in there. That was the money for my hip surgery. That was the money for my funeral, so I would not be a burden. $42, I whispered. Where? Where did it go? David looked at the screen, reading the transaction history. It looks like a series of transfers over the last 3 years. Some are labelled as market research, but the merchant codes map back to, well, one is Lucky Star Gaming, and another is a cryptocurrency exchange platform. There are dozens of withdrawals. Mrs. Elwood? Sometimes $500, sometimes $2,000 at a time. He had gambled it. He had taken the blood money from his father's death and fed it into online slot machines and fake digital coins. And the life insurance, I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told him to cancel my old policy last year to save on premiums. It was not cancelled, David said softly. It was converted into a variable annuity. It is a high-risk investment product. It is currently, showing a loss of about 60%. And because of the early withdrawal clauses, if you try to take it out now, the penalty fees will be astronomical. You actually owe fees on it. I sat back in the chair. The silence in the bank was deafening. I had been eating soup from a can and sewing patches onto my work trousers while my son played poker with my life savings. David leaned forward, lowering his voice until it was barely a whisper. Mrs. Elwood, I cannot give you legal advice. I am just a banker. But if you did not authorize these specific transactions, you need to speak to someone. You should look up the term elder financial abuse, and you should do it today. I walked out of the bank and into the blinding parking lot. The heat hit me, but I felt ice cold. The incident at the restaurant, the water in my face. It was not just a temper tantrum. It was a distraction. It was the final act of a man who knew he had already taken everything and was tired of pretending to care about the empty shell that remained. I drove home on autopilot. When I got inside, I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. I typed 3 words into the search bar: Elder Financial Abuse, US. The results poured in. Stories of sons and daughters stealing deeds to houses, draining pension funds, coercing parents into signing loans. I read a story about a woman in Ohio whose son spent her entire retirement on a new truck and then put her in a state-run facility. I remembered a joke Jacob made last Thanksgiving. We were eating pie, and he had laughed and said, "You know, Mom, I hope you live to be 100, but if you go early, well, at least it saves on the nursing home bills." Right. I had laughed then. I thought it was dark humor. Now I realized it was a financial projection. He was betting on my death to cover his tracks. I stared at the phone on my kitchen counter. For 58 years, I had protected him. I had hidden his bad grades, paid his parking tickets, and lied to his father about his mistakes. But the woman who did those things died last night in a booth at a chain restaurant. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for a non-profit legal aid organization I found on the screen. It rang once, twice. A woman's voice answered. Safe Horizon Helpline. This is Sarah speaking. How can I help you? I took a breath. The first deep breath I had taken in years. Hello, I said. My name is Marion, and I think my son has been stealing from me. Saying it out loud did not break me. It set me free. The office of Halloway and Finch smelled of ground coffee and old leather. It was a serious smell, the scent of a place where disasters were managed and lives were restructured. I sat in a high-backed chair, gripping my purse so hard my knuckles turned white. Across the mahogany desk sat Ruth Halloway. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that looked like they had seen every possible variation of human betrayal. Ruth did not interrupt me once. For 40 minutes? The only sound in the room was the hum of a laser printer in the hallway and my own voice, shaky at first, then growing steadier as I laid out the autopsy of my life. I told her about the loans for college that never ended. I told her about the stack of bank papers I signed without reading because I wanted to be a supportive mother. I told her about the water he threw in my face at the restaurant because I asked for $50. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the room. Ruth took a sip of her black coffee and set the mug down with a deliberate click. Marion, she said, her voice low and devoid of pity. You are describing a textbook case of coercive control. He did not just take your money. He made you dependent on him to manage it, and then he used that dependence to humiliate you. It is a cycle, and in the state of Arizona, it is also a crime. I blinked, feeling a sudden rush of cold air. A crime I thought it was just bad family matters. Ruth opened a file folder. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That is the legal term. We can revoke his power of attorney immediately. We can freeze every account he has touched. We can demand a forensic accounting of the last 5 years. And if we find evidence of fraud, which, based on what you told me about the life insurance, we can file a civil lawsuit, or we can go to the police. My stomach lurched. The police. I saw Jacob in a jail cell, his career over, his life ruined. The mother in me, the one who had bandaged his scraped knees, screamed in protest. I can't send him to prison, I stammered, looking down at my hands. He is my son. If he has a record, he will lose his job. It would destroy his future. Ruth leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine, sharp as scalpels. Marion, look at me. His future. He spent the last 3 years destroying yours. He gambled your husband's death benefit. He put you in debt. He threw water on you in public. She paused, letting the words sink in. He is not a child who made a mistake. He is a predator who lives in your guest room. The only reason you are not homeless right now is luck. I sat back, stunned. No one had ever spoken about Jacob like that. But as the words settled, I realized they were true. So, what do we do? I asked. We take back the power. Ruth said, we do not have to call the police today, but we are going to cut him off, completely, and legally. She slid a stack of documents across the desk. Sign here to revoke the power of attorney. Sign here to demand the bank freeze the joint accounts pending an investigation. And sign here to authorize me to demand every single bank statement from the last 5 years. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. Signing this felt like cutting an umbilical cord. But this time, the cord was wrapped around my neck, choking me. I signed. 1 signature. 2. 3. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a strange weight lifting off my shoulders. Ruth gathered the papers and tapped them on the desk to straighten the stack. Then she looked at me with a curious expression. Marion, she asked quietly, have you ever thought about leaving the United States? I stared at her. Leaving I have never been east of the Mississippi, let alone out of the country. You might want to think about it, Ruth said, her tone professional but suggestive. If we do this right, you might recover more funds than you expect. And sometimes, the best way to end a cycle of abuse is to remove yourself from the map entirely. Somewhere your money goes further. Somewhere he cannot drive to your house at midnight to bang on the door. I walked out of the office 10 minutes later. The Arizona sun was blinding, but I did not squint. I held the manila envelope containing copies of the documents against my chest. It felt different than the box of old memories I had carried yesterday. This was not the past. This was a weapon. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat. I looked at the building one last time. I had walked in there as a victim, a mother trying to understand where she went wrong. I was driving away as a plaintiff. I had just signed my resignation letter from the job of being a nice mother, and for the first time in decades, I did not feel guilty. I felt dangerous. Ruth told me that the most dangerous thing a prey animal can do is stop twitching before it is safe. If I changed my behavior too abruptly, Jacob would notice. He would sense the shift in the power dynamic, and like any cornered animal, he might lash out or hide the remaining assets. So, I had to continue being the mother he expected. I had to be the pathetic, confused old woman who needed his help to open a PDF file. I sat on my worn beige sofa and typed out a text message. Hope you're having a good week. Honey, don't work too hard. I added the sticker of a cartoon bear hugging a heart, the one I had sent him every Tuesday for 3 years. It made me sick to look at it. My thumb hovered over the send button, and for a second, I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I pressed send. Good job, Marion. I whispered to the empty room. Now, smile. When his reply came 3 hours later, a simple thumbs-up emoji, I did not cry. I did not feel the familiar pang of neglect. Instead, I took a screenshot. I saved it to a hidden folder on my phone named Recipes. Ruth had told me that every dismissive text, every demand for money, every complaint about me being a burden was now evidence. I was not a mother grieving a relationship anymore. I was a spy gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. On Thursday, I took the bus to the community centre downtown. I had signed up for a free financial literacy course for seniors. The room smelled of floor wax and stale donuts. I sat in the back row, surrounded by people who were learning how to balance checkbooks. I was learning something else. I learned how to use a spreadsheet. I learned how to track hidden fees. I learned how to spot the difference between a legitimate transfer and a laundering attempt. Now, if you look at column B, the instructor, a patient young man named Kevin, said, "You can see where the recurring payments drain the principal." I stared at the screen. I saw exactly where the drain was. It was not a subscription service. It was my son. After class, I walked into a budget hair salon in a strip mall next to a grocery store. I did not ask for a makeover. I asked for armor. "Cut it short," I told the stylist, a girl snapping gum. "And dye it brown, dark brown, no highlights." "Are you sure, sweetie?" she asked, holding up a lock of my greying hair. "The grey makes you look soft." "I don't want to look soft," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I want to look nondescript." When I walked out, the frazzled, grey-haired widow was gone. In her place was a woman with sharp, dark hair that framed a face which had stopped smiling to please others. I looked harder. I looked like someone you would not want to cheat. That afternoon, I walked into Desert Horizon Bank, a competitor to the bank where Jacob had his claws in my accounts. I opened a checking account in my name only. I requested paperless statements sent to a brand new email address I had created on a library computer, mfreedom58@gmail.com. The password was the name of the street I grew up on, followed by the date I decided to stop being a victim. That night, I called Jacob. I made my voice pitch up a little, adding a tremor of confusion. "Jacob, I am so sorry to bother you," I said, holding the phone away from my ear as I sat at my kitchen table with my new bank paperwork spread out before me. "I am trying to log into the electric bill app, but it keeps asking for a code. I am just so bad with this technology." "Jesus, Mom," he sighed, the sound of a crowded bar in the background. "Just hit resend. It is not rocket science. I can't do everything for you." "Oh, thank you. Honey," I said, my voice dripping with feigned gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you managing things." I hung up. I knew exactly how to use the app. I just needed him to believe that I was still the helpless old woman who couldn't survive without his supervision. If he thought I was stupid, he wouldn't look closely at the withdrawals I was about to authorize. Later that night, around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. It was Jacob. He was drunk. "Mom," he slurred. "Mom, are you there?" "I am here, Jacob," I said, sitting up in bed, instantly awake. I reached over and pressed the record button on the app Ruth had installed for me. "They are trying to screw me at work," he rambled, his voice thick with self-pity. "My boss, he doesn't get it. I am the best analyst they have. And the debt. Mom, the interest rates are killing me. I need a break. Why doesn't anyone help me?" I listened to him whine about the mortgage on a house he shouldn't have bought and the payments on a car he didn't need. He talked for 20 minutes about his suffering. Not once did he mention the $40,000 he stole from his father's death benefit. Not once did he apologize for the water in my face. That sounds very hard. Jacob, I said, my voice flat. It is hard. He shouted, then lowered his voice to a sob. I am the victim here. Mom, you don't get it. I hung up when he passed out. I saved the recording. Then I opened my notebook. It was a black leather journal I had bought at a thrift store. On the first page, I had written a list. Step 1, secure the perimeter. Done step 2. Gather intelligence. Done step 3. Empty the accounts. Step 4, Portugal. I ran my finger over the word, Portugal. I realized I was smiling in the dark. For 33 years, I had tried to be a good mother by telling the truth and giving everything I had. It turned out that the best thing I could do for myself was to lie. I closed the book and went to sleep, sleeping more soundly than I had in years. I was not just acting. I was rehearsing for the rest of my life. We sat in Ruth's conference room with a stack of bank statements that looked like a tower of bricks. For 3 hours. The only sound was the uncapping of highlighters and the scratch of felt tips on paper. Ruth had told me to mark every expense that was actually mine in yellow and every expense that was Jacob's in red. By the time we finished, the pages looked like they were bleeding. Look at this, Ruth said, pointing to a transaction from 2 years ago. $5,000 for consulting fees paid to a shell company. And here, $3,000 for a business retreat that coincides with a charge at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. This is not management. Marion, this is embezzlement. We built our case not on emotion, but on math. The next morning, we walked into the regional headquarters of Frontier Mutual. We did not wait in line for a teller. Ruth had arranged a meeting with the regional manager, a man named Sterling, who wore a suit that was slightly too tight. The meeting was tense. Ruth laid the color-coded statements on his mahogany desk. She spoke calmly about compliance failures and the bank's duty of care regarding vulnerable adult customers. She used phrases like facilitating financial exploitation and potential liability in a civil suit. Mr. Sterling looked at the red ink. He looked at Ruth. Then he looked at me. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He realized that a lawsuit involving a widow being robbed by her son while the bank looked the other way would be a public relations nightmare. We can restructure the accounts, Mr. Sterling said, loosening his tie. We can reverse the overdraft fees and the penalties on the annuity withdrawal, given the questionable nature of the authorization, and we will close the joint access immediately. It took an hour of signing papers. My hand cramped, but I did not stop. With every signature, I was reclaiming a piece of my life. By noon, the remaining balance of the Elwood Family Support Fund, along with nearly $8,000 in refunded fees and interest, was transferred electronically to my secret account at Desert Horizon Bank. Then came the final cut. I signed the document revoking Jacob's durable power of attorney. I cancelled the secondary credit card. I updated the contact information so that every alert, every statement, and every fraud warning would go to my new email address and my prepaid burner phone. It is done, Ruth said as we walked out into the parking lot. He is locked out, and he doesn't know it yet. I did not go home immediately. I went to a different branch of Desert Horizon Bank and withdrew $9,000 in cash. I requested small bills. I rented a safety deposit box and placed the envelope of cash inside. This was my escape fund. If everything went wrong, if the digital world failed me, I would have paper currency to buy a plane ticket. That night, the phone rang at 11 o'clock. It was Jacob. "Mom," he shouted, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "I am at a gas station. My card, it just got declined. The machine says, 'Contact issuer.' Did you forget to pay the bill or something?" I sat on my couch, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. My heart rate did not even jump. "Oh dear," I said, injecting a wobble into my voice. "That is strange. Maybe the chip is dirty. You know how these machines are." I tried it 3 times. "Mum," he yelled, "I have people waiting behind me. This is humiliating. Call the bank right now and fix it. I can't call them now." "Honey, they are closed," I said soothingly. "I will go down there tomorrow morning and ask the nice teller what is wrong. Do you have cash?" "No, I don't have—" Ugh! He slammed his hand against something hard. "Fine. I will use my emergency card. Just fix it tomorrow. God, you are useless sometimes." He hung up. I put the phone down and opened my banking app. I looked at the balance in my Desert Horizon account. For the first time in 5 years, I knew exactly how much money I had to the penny. And for the first time in his life, my son had no idea that the well had run dry. I picked up the stack of statements Ruth had let me keep. I was about to file them away when a specific recurring payment caught my eye. It was for $300 a month, labeled HOA Management, Austin. I pulled out my phone and searched the address associated with the merchant code. It was a condominium complex in Austin, Texas. I called Ruth immediately. He didn't just spend the money. I told her, my voice trembling with a new kind of anger. He bought an apartment in Austin. It must be an investment property he was hiding from me. "Send me the address," Ruth said, and I could practically hear her smiling over the phone. "If he used stolen funds to make the down payment, that apartment is not his asset. Marion, it is the next target." Ruth suggested I file a formal report with Adult Protective Services. It was the logical next step, the bureaucratic shield that would place a case number on my suffering. But as I sat in my small kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, I realized that a case number would remain hidden in a file cabinet. Jacob thrived in the dark. He built his entire persona on the illusion of success, on the tailored suits and the LinkedIn posts about ethical wealth management. To truly stop him, I did not just need the law, I needed the light. I opened my laptop and composed an email. The recipient was the Human Resources Department at Veritas Ledger. I did not write with anger. I wrote with the icy precision of a woman who had spent 30 years formatting corporate memos. "To whom it may concern," I typed, "I am writing to bring to your attention a matter of financial ethics involving one of your senior analysts, Jacob Elwood. While I understand personal matters are usually private, I believe the use of company resources and the misrepresentation of client meetings to cover personal gambling debts may violate your code of conduct." I attached the bank statements. I highlighted the charges at the casino in Las Vegas that he had labeled "Client Acquisition Dinner" in his notes to me, alongside a time-stamped photo from his own Instagram showing him at a poker table with the caption, "Working hard or hardly working." I hit send. It felt like dropping a match into a pool of gasoline. 2 days later, I received a reply. It was brief. "Mrs. Elwood, Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Veritas Ledger takes allegations of financial misconduct very seriously. We have opened an internal investigation. While the corporate gears began to grind, I turned to the court of public opinion. I joined a private support group for victims of elder financial abuse. Under the username Desert Choc Phoenix 58, I wrote my story. I titled it, "My son threw ice water in my face because I asked for money to buy heart medication." I left out names, but I included the specific details: the restaurant chain, the price of his cocktail, the exact words he used about his mortgage. A popular independent financial blogger in the group asked to share it. By Friday, the story had gone viral. It was shared thousands of times. The comments were a river of fire. "This guy is a monster." One user wrote, "If I knew who he was, I would get him fired myself." Jacob saw it. I knew he saw it because my phone rang at 7 in the evening, and his custom ringtone cut through the silence of my apartment. I pressed the record button before answering. "Did you write this?" He screamed. There was no greeting. Did you write this trash on the internet? People are talking. Mum. Someone in the office sent it to the group chat. "I don't know what you are talking about." "Jacob," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am just an old woman who doesn't understand technology. Remember? Don't play games with me," he shouted, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "I know it is you. You are trying to ruin me. That money was mine anyway. It is my inheritance. I was just accessing it early. It is my right." One looked at the recording timer ticking upward. He had just confessed to the crime. He had admitted that he viewed my life savings as his property, and my continued existence as merely an inconvenience delaying his payout. "Thank you for clarifying that, Jacob," I said softly. The following Monday, the hammer fell. According to the email I received from a sympathetic HR representative who needed to verify some dates, Jacob was called into a meeting. They placed my bank statements next to his expense reports. They pulled up his social media profiles, where he bragged about his self-made lifestyle, and contrasted them with the foreclosure notices I had provided. The image of the successful fintech wizard crumbled. He was a fraud who stole from his mother to pretend he was rich. He was fired for cause. 3 hours later, my phone rang again. This time, he was not screaming. He sounded breathless, terrified. Mom, you have to help me," he stammered. They let me go. I lost the job, and I tried to buy gas. But the cards are all dead. I have no cash. I have a car payment due on Tuesday. You have to transfer $5,000 to my personal account right now. Please. I can't live like a poor person." I stood by the window, looking out at the dusty street. I imagined him sitting in his luxury car, the leather seats suddenly feeling like a cage. "I cannot do that. Jacob," I said. "What do you mean you can't?" he cried, his voice cracking. "I am your son. You owe me. You have to take care of me." "I don't owe you anything," I replied. "You said you had done too much for me." "Well, I agree. So I am returning the favor. I am done engaging with your finances." "You can't just cut me off," he yelled. "What am I supposed to do? I suggest you look for a job." I said, "I hear the cleaning crews downtown are always hiring for the night shift. It is honest work. It paid for your college." "Mum?" "Wait. Mum, I am not your banker anymore. Jacob," I said. "And as of today, I have officially resigned. I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of peace. Ruth called me into her office 3 days after Jacob was fired. She did not offer me coffee this time. She leaned across her desk, her hands clasped tightly together, and looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach turn. "Marian," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have taken his money. We have taken his job. We have taken his reputation. A man like Jacob, a man who defines himself by what he owns. When you strip that away, you are left with rage, pure, unadulterated rage. And right now, that rage has only one target." I swallowed hard. You think he would hurt me? I think desperate people do desperate things. Ruth replied. He knows where you live. He has a key to your building. A restraining order is just a piece of paper. Marian. It stops a law-abiding citizen. It does not stop a son who feels entitled to break your neck to get his inheritance early. She paused, then pushed a pamphlet across the desk. Have you thought about my suggestion? About leaving? I took the pamphlet home. That night, instead of worrying about the locks on my door, I opened my laptop. I spent 4 hours watching travel videos on YouTube. I watched drone footage of cliffs in Portugal and walking tours of cobblestone streets in sleepy fishing villages. I looked at the cost of living index. I compared rent prices. I settled on a town called Praia da Espera. It was a small coastal village 2 hours south of Lisbon. The rent for a 1-bedroom apartment with a sea view was less than what I paid for my car insurance in Arizona. I began the process with a kind of feverish efficiency. I applied for an expedited passport. I joined a Facebook group called Expats in Portugal and asked questions about health insurance and residency visas. I found a landlord named Antonio who spoke broken English and agreed to rent to me based on a video call interview. Then came the meeting with Oscar, a financial advisor Ruth had recommended. He was a quiet man with thick glasses who loved spreadsheets. "Mrs. Elwood," Oscar said, tapping his calculator. "It is actually quite ironic, because the bank was so terrified of a lawsuit regarding their negligence in allowing your son to access the funds. They have agreed to a settlement that includes full restitution plus significant damages. When we convert your total assets, well, you have enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. "Enough to live in Praia da Espera for the next 20 years without working a single day." He smiled. "Your son's greed actually forced the bank to make you wealthier than you were before." I went back to my apartment and began to dismantle my life. I sold the sofa on an online marketplace. I donated my winter coats. I filled 5 trash bags with clothes I had worn to a job I no longer had. I kept only a small box. Inside was my wedding ring, a photo of Jacob when he was 5 years old and still innocent, and the black leather notebook where I had plotted my freedom. I told my neighbour, Mrs. Gable, that I was going on a long vacation to Europe to find myself. "Oh, how brave," she chirped. "When will you be back?" "I am not sure." I lied smoothly. I bought an open-ended ticket. It was not open-ended. It was a one-way ticket from Phoenix to Lisbon. On my last night in the apartment, the rooms echoed with emptiness. The walls were bare. My suitcase stood by the door, packed with lightweight linens and walking shoes. Ruth had the civil lawsuit ready to file the moment my plane took off. It would freeze any future assets Jacob might try to acquire and demand repayment for emotional distress. I took out my burner phone. I had one last thing to do. I typed a message to Jacob. I am going away for a while. Do not look for me. Do not worry about me. I am safe. The response came 30 seconds later. Where are you? Then another. You can't just leave. You have to sign the loan papers for me. Mum, I am warning you. If you don't tell me where you are right now, I will come over there and break down the door. I swear to God, stop being so selfish. I did not reply. I forwarded the screenshots to Ruth. Add it to the file, I whispered to the empty room. I stood by the window and looked out at the parking lot one last time. A plane roared overhead, its lights blinking against the dark desert sky. Somewhere up there was the path to a place where no one knew my name, where no one expected me to be a victim, and where the ocean was waiting to wash away the memory of ice water dripping down my face. I turned off the light. I was not running away. I was moving on. I can reconstruct the events of that Tuesday morning with the precision of a crime scene investigator, piecing together the timeline from Ruth's legal updates and the frantic voicemails that flooded my phone when I finally turned it back on. While I was sipping tomato juice at 30,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, my son was waking up to a world that no longer belonged to him. At 9 o'clock in the morning, just as the fasten seatbelt sign turned off in my cabin, Ruth Halloway executed the final transfer. She swept the remaining funds from the joint accounts, every cent that had been returned by the bank after our settlement negotiations, and moved them into my secure, solo account at Desert Horizon Bank. Then, she filed the civil lawsuit for financial elder abuse with the electronic court system. At 10 o'clock, Jacob stood in the leasing office of a luxury apartment complex in Austin, Texas. He was there to pay the deposit on the condo he had secretly put a hold on, the one he intended to buy with the rest of my life savings. He handed over the debit card linked to the Elwood Family Support Fund with the casual arrogance of a man who has never been told no. The leasing agent ran the card. She frowned. "I am sorry, sir," she said. "It was declined. That is impossible." Jacob scoffed, tapping his fingers on the glass desk. "Run it again. It is probably just... The chip is sensitive." She ran it again. Declined. The error code says refer to issuer. Jacob pulled out his phone, his face flushing red. He logged into the mobile banking app. Instead of the six-figure balance he expected to see, a bright red banner flashed across the screen. Account frozen due to legal dispute. Balance 0. Panic is a cold thing. I imagine he felt the same chill I felt when he threw the water on me. Only this time, there was no towel to wipe it away. He dialed my number. "The subscriber you have dialed is currently unavailable," the automated voice told him. I was 5 hours away, watching clouds drift beneath the wing of the plane. He drove to the local branch of Frontier Mutual, tires screeching. He stormed into the lobby and demanded to see the manager, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I need access to my mother's money," he screamed, slamming his hand on the counter. She is confused. She is old. You can't lock me out. That is my future inheritance you are holding hostage," the branch manager, Mr. Sterling, did not look intimidated. He looked tired. He walked out of his office and handed Jacob a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Elwood," he said, his voice flat. "This is a copy of the revocation of power of attorney, signed by Marion Elwood and notarized last week. You have no legal standing here. And if you continue to shout about inheritance while under investigation for financial abuse, I will have to ask the security guard to escort you out." Lawyer Jacob stammered, the blood draining from his face. "She has a..." Lawyer. "She does," Sterling replied, Halloway and Finch? All inquiries go to them. As Jacob stumbled out of the bank, his phone pinged. It was an email from the Human Resources Department at Veritas Ledger. It was the final nail in the coffin of his career. The letter stated that his employment was terminated effective immediately due to violations of the company's ethics policy regarding fiduciary responsibility. It also noted, in cold legal language, that the company would fully cooperate with any law enforcement subpoenas regarding his financial activities. He sat in his car, the engine idling. The landlord in Austin called to say that, without the deposit, the condo was going back on the market and they would be suing for breach of contract. The financing company for his luxury sedan called to remind him that he was 60 days past due and repossession was imminent, in a last, desperate attempt to find the woman who had always fixed his messes. Jacob drove to my apartment complex. He ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, sweating in his expensive suit. He pounded on the door. "Mom," he yelled. "Mom, open up. Stop this. Stop this joke right now." Silence answered him. He fumbled for his spare key, the one he had kept despite my requests to return it. He jammed it into the lock and shoved the door open. He stopped dead in the doorway. The apartment was empty. The furniture was gone. The walls were patched and painted a sterile white. The only thing left was the echo of his own heavy breathing. He walked to the kitchen counter where the mail usually sat. There was a single sticker on the mailbox flap, "Return to sender." No forwarding address. He realized then that there was no money to steal. There was no mother to manipulate. There was no safety net to catch him. I picture him sliding down the wall, sitting on the cheap linoleum floor of the empty kitchen, putting his head in his hands and weeping. He was crying for himself, of course. He was crying because for the first time in 33 years, he was truly alone, thousands of miles away. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Lisbon. The local time is 7 in the morning, and the weather is clear." I looked out the window. Below me, the coastline of Portugal stretched out like a golden ribbon meeting the blue Atlantic. The sun was rising, casting long shadows over the water. I saw the bridge, the terracotta roofs, the promise of a life that belonged only to me. I did not look back. My son was on the floor of an empty room in America, but I was flying. The rain in Praia da Espera was different from the rain in Arizona. It was not a violent storm that flooded the streets and vanished in an hour. It was a gentle, persistent mist that turned the cobblestones into polished mirrors reflecting the street lamps. I sat in a small corner cafe overlooking the Atlantic, a notebook open in front of me. I was writing my story, not for publication, but to verify to myself that it had actually happened. My phone buzzed on the table. It was followed by a notification from Ruth. She had forwarded the final court judgment. The judge had ordered Jacob to pay restitution for the funds he had misappropriated, plus legal fees. We both knew he did not have a dime to his name, but the money was not the point. The point was the piece of paper that legally defined him as an abuser. It was my vindication. Then, the video call request appeared on my screen. The username was new, a string of random numbers, but I knew who it was. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the red button. I could decline. I could block him and order another pastry. But I realized I did not need to hide anymore. I pressed accept. Jacob's face filled the screen. He looked 20 years older than the man who had sat across from me in that restaurant only 2 months ago. His beard was patchy and unkempt. His eyes were sunk deep into dark sockets. Behind him, I saw the white wall of an empty room, likely the Austin apartment he was being evicted from. "Mom," he croaked. The connection crackled. "Mom, is that you? Hello? Jacob?" I said. My voice was calm. My heart beat steadily. He started to cry. It was not the angry, demanding shouting of before. It was the weeping of a man who had reached for the stars and fallen into a ditch. I lost it all." He sobbed, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "The job, the car, the apartment. They are kicking me out on Friday. I have nowhere to go. I am sleeping on the floor. Mum, I am so sorry. I know I was awful. But, please, I am begging you. I have no one." I watched him fall apart. A part of me, the old Marion, wanted to reach through the screen and fix it. But I stayed seated. "You have not lost everything," I said, looking him in the eye. "You still have your health. You have your degree. And you have the one thing I sacrificed my entire life so you would not have to worry about time. You have time to change. Jacob, if you really want to." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought this was the preamble to a bank transfer. "So, you will help me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Just enough to get a deposit on a place. I promise I will pay you back." I took a sip of my coffee. "I have already allocated the funds." "Jacob." He exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you. Mom, I knew you wouldn't. I knew you loved me. I put the remaining money into an irrevocable trust." I continued, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "It is not for you. It is for your future children. If you ever grow up enough to have a family, they will have an education fund. But the terms are strict. You cannot touch the principal. You cannot borrow against it. And if you ever threaten me, harass me, or try to contact me for money again, the entire trust liquidates automatically and goes to a charity for victims of financial abuse." Jacob froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me, realizing that the safety net was there, but it was suspended 10 feet above his head, forever out of reach. I had removed the incentive for him to use me, and I had removed the incentive for him to abuse me. Why, he whispered, "Why would you do that?" "Because I love you enough to stop crippling you," I said. "And I love myself enough to stop letting you cripple me." I saw the realization wash over him. The bank of Mom was not just closed, it had been demolished. "From now on," I said, "nothing you do will pull me down. You are free, Jacob. And so am I." I ended the call. The screen went black. I paid my bill and walked out into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped. I walked down to the beach, my shoes sinking slightly into the wet sand. The sound of the ocean was rhythmic and vast. I closed my eyes and felt the spray on my face. It reminded me of that night in the restaurant, the shock of the ice water hitting my skin. I used to think that was the moment my life fell apart. Now, standing on the edge of a continent, I realized it was the moment my life began. I looked out at the horizon, where the grey water met the grey sky. I was alone in a foreign country. I was 58 years old. I had scars that would never fully heal. But as I turned to walk back toward the lights of my new home, I felt something I had not felt in 40 years. I was smiling, and this time, the smile belonged only to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm really curious. Where are you guys tuning in from today? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Stay strong, everyone.